from, from their border. All truckers from Tanzania can only move goods up to the border where Kenyans maybe can be able to pick that. And of course, when the time came for Kenya for the flights of international flights to resume, remember one of the countries that we didn't see opening up to Kenya Airways was Dar es Salaam, and these are some of the diplomatic issues that we are dealing with, and our concern, particularly being how it's affecting businesses across the region, how it's affecting our markets. Of course, the region so much depends on the ports that we have in Tanzania and Kenya. And if this closing of borders, and conflicts from time to time, and we know a lot of small business owners and residents who live within or next to our borders, trade across the border. We're looking at all those situations and how it's been affecting the economy, or rather, if this the region to prosper. So those are some of the issues that we are going to be examining today. And of course, today I'm joined by two panelists. I know we had said that we'd be joined by three panelists, but then Alumayo Kideran from Nigeria, really, who we would have loved, to give us a perspective from, the West African region, is not going to be able to join us today because of some other commitment. So I'm going to introduce our two panelists today who are joining us. I'll start with Edwin Kimani Joroge, who is a legal advisor at Cross Border Associate. Yeah, Edwin is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and has extensive knowledge and working experience in the legal sector. He has had engagement in the extractive industries as a researcher and an advisor to the Extractive Baraza, a project at Strathmore University. Here he helped train government officials and stakeholders on various aspects of transactions and taxation of the oil and gas industry in Kenya. He has also previously been engaged in busy commercial law firms, research centers, and offered consultancy on individual level on regional trade, tax, and project finance. Our next, our second panelist from Uganda is John Mugambi, who is the executive director at Action for Liberty and Economic Development, which is a think tank that is aimed at promoting ideas of a free and prosperous society through educating, empowering students and youth post-school to become effective advocate of liberty and freedom in Kenya. Welcome so much, gentlemen. So Mugambi, I'm going to begin with you. What do you think is the problem across our borders? Now that this is not only happening in Kenya or in Tanzania, and it hasn't started today. We've had these instances across the borders for so long, all over Africa. What do you think is the problem exactly?
Yeah, thank you very much, Maoki. I'm so grateful and privileged to be here once again. As you've said, I'm Mugabe John Socrates, the Executive Director of Action for Liberty and Economic Development. Yeah, as you've asked a very good question, which takes us to all the disagreement and all the chaos and the diplomatic misunderstanding we've been having since our independence, the independence of the countries of East Africa. And it is not been one generation, but has been, I think every generation comes and disagrees at this certain point. We see our leaders in the region every time trying to get a point and a ground where they try to disagree with each other. And I think partly, which I don't want to blame a lot, it's a kind of a colonial legacy also, the way how the borders were constructed. I do believe that the colonial legacy also has got a problem, because we see how East Africa used to be. I think it was one, it had the kingdom, it has these chiefdoms, and also communities which used to trade freely within the region. But the construction of the borders, or the Berlin Wall Conference, which divided the region and grouped them into countries, and countries with different nationalities, it ended up raising the chaos of borders and also the movement along. When we are divided, Uganda started seeing itself as Uganda and started having this nationalism, misconceived nationalism. Kenya the same, Tanzania and others. And we got independence built on the foundation which was weak, where leaders who fought for our independence did not so much focus on the freedom which we had before the colonialists divided and mapped our country. So even when we took over, we saw the merging of East African community during the Nyerere, Obote, and Kenyatta. Then after that, we saw in 1972-3 how it collapsed when Amin came in, and it collapsed not because it was about trade, but it was the ego of leaders, the egoistic nature of these leaders who wanted to prove to each other that they are the strongest in the region. They wanted to have hegemony over the region. We saw how Amin disintegrated the East African community, which had good and ambitious plan to promote trade in the region. And then after there, it also it went over, and then we saw, I think in 1990s, 1999, around there, we saw the East African coming back. But still, even the East African community coming back as a bloc which is going to facilitate the flow of goods and services within the region, with even thinking about the common currency, the East African currency, East African shillings. Still, we saw some countries still having pockets of disagreement. There is a lake, I think the lake, Uganda and Kenya, there's where we have the lake where we disagree. When fish crosses from Kenya and comes to Uganda, Uganda says this is our fish. When the fishermen, the other side, come this side, and sometimes they deployed a lot, Mijingo Island, I think you know the Mijingo Island. But it's something which has been going on, and I believe it's something which we need to get a foundation of understanding. And even when we are entering disagreement, because we've been having agreements on papers of the regional integration, but at the end of the day, the spirits and the cracks still raise up within, and you find that the goods can no longer cross from Kenya to Uganda, from Uganda to Rwanda. I will give you a scenario of Rwanda. You know very well that Uganda and Rwanda, we have been getting some disagreement because the political hegemony between the two countries are the leaders. Museveni wanted to control Rwanda because you know very well that Kagame was a minister in Uganda. Before he went to Rwanda, he was a minister of internal affairs. And most of the leaders in Rwanda fought a guerrilla war in Uganda. And our president, Museveni, helped them to go to Rwanda and take over. And when they took over, our president believed that I will still be able to control. That one will become my child. I've helped him to get power, so it will work within my interest. And a point reached where Kagame believed like, no, I'm no longer your child. You helped me, but now Rwanda is an independent state. And Uganda still wanted to oversat its influence on Kenya. And last year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Mugambi. Yeah, let me bring on Edwin. Edwin, can you still hear me?
Hello,
Edwin?
yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much. So Mugambe has sort of been giving us an history of the relations that countries in the region have had. But I must ask, are there genuine reasons, that contribute to some of these conflicts that we have in the region between countries, or is it an issue of presidents who are in a contest of who is mightier than the other?
Well, thank you very much for that question and inviting me. To an extent, I agree with you and I agree with Mugambi, but we have to look at it a little bit deeper, not just the history, but the current existing
Right.
forms of government. Uh, to one thing, I would point the issue to political will. Political will of the various countries as led by the executives. You see, in East Africa, we don't have a good democratic systems where we identify countries within their own social setting. We identify the countries based on their presidents, their executives, and they hold so much will. In essence, what Mugambi is saying is that we inherited the imperialist system. And when we gained our independence, all we wanted was to dismantle these systems. But these African dictatorships realize that they benefit from that. In essence, what we have is private government, where the will of a country or the will of the government is based on the executive. We also have a failure of the treaty. Yes, we have the summit at the head, but the summit makes totalitarian decisions that override. If you look at it, for example, the East African Court of Justice, they overrule the will of the people. I think for us to be successful, I think that for the East African community to really work, we have to identify the will of the people who benefit from the East African community. And those are the traders. Those are the small scale industries. Those are the traders within the borders. If you go, for example, to the border between Kenya and Uganda at Busia, the beneficiaries of the people or the people who are affected very much by the decisions of the executives, and that is the summit, are the traders who are there. We have to identify diplomacy. We have to identify East African community based on the beneficiaries of this agreement. The treaty itself is a failure based on the over dependence on the summit. So I agree with Mugambi. To an extent, we have to look at the history, but history itself should tell us where to change, and we should relook at this treaty so that we stop over depending on the summit. We should further now entrench researchers. We should further entrench the ideas of experts, of opinion makers within the East African community. So yes, to a large extent, I agree with you, and I agree with Mugambi.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Edwin. Yeah, I will agree with you on a couple of things about the history of the region. The sort of governments that we have. Of course, it's even within individual countries, across the region. It's a bit hard. Maybe for something that the president does not want, to be implemented and so on. And one can only imagine what the situation becomes when it becomes a regional thing, with a number of presidents who have different interests and views on matters. And yeah, but now that we've established some of the issues that are the cause of the cause of conflicts across the regions. And of course, well, diplomacy, diplomatic relations, diplomatic ties, and such other terms have been used in the past to to try and describe some of these situations and relations between countries. But I'm more interested in getting into the matters of open borders, and trying to see how our economy, rather economies, get affected the more we keep on seeing these issues and borders getting closed. And I want us to begin from the very basic point of view on matters open borders. Mugambi, what exactly do we mean by the term open borders? Is it a matter of having what? Having a gate, or a wall across the border, or what is the extent, of the whole notion of open borders?
Yeah, thank you very much. Open borders, yeah, when they say open borders, in most cases, people will imagine of a fence, a gate, a border at Busia, and an entry
right.
and exit for the goods and services. But open borders is exchange, where exchange, first of all, the exchange of goods and services can easily be facilitated. You can exchange from one point to the other. And it is also the flow, the inflow and the outflow. In most cases, it's a law, or there can be no wall. For example, we can have Busia, but then when there is a strong law against crossing, even if there is no security at the border end, but when there is a law which people can respect and say, we cannot cross to this side. So open borders is just about letting exchange happen very easily or at people's will, with respect to exchange of goods and services, and also people crossing from one point to another. And when we look at the East African countries, we have many factors where the borders seem to be closed physically and psychologically. For example, when you look at Uganda and South Sudan, the borders may not be closed by borders, by wall, but there is a wall the other end in South Sudan. And then even though the border is open, but goods cannot cross and people cannot cross easily. So it remains like an obstacle, and borders remain closed even if it's not physically. So basically that's how I envisage the open border kind of understanding.
Thank you so much, Mugambi. Let me get back to you, Kimani. We are talking about we are having two terms here that we are trying to connect. The whole issue of diplomacy and open borders. How do the two terms relate?
Well, this is what I understand maybe by an open border. It's an enabled system of movement of people between jurisdictions with few or no restrictions. It's as simple as that. It's not a passport. It's not a military checkpoint. It's just an enabled movement of people. Diplomacy comes in when we identify between different jurisdictions, between different countries. Now, countries have to relate with each other. We have to monitor what comes in the country. Because you see, there are, for example, contraband, movement of arms, criminal activity, restricted substances. Now, I think diplomacy comes in when countries are able to communicate to each other, opening systems of communication between the heads of different countries, so that borders can remain open. In as much as there are certain restrictions, and not, I say, with few or no restrictions. We need to, the reason we have diplomacy is to ensure that there are as few restrictions as possible, to ensure that there is no friction between the movement of people and the relation of countries. I think that is how they interrelate.
Okay, thank you so much. And Mogami, my next question was to touch on any particular situations, you know, that might be necessary, or rather that might be justifiable, as to, you know, ideally one country closing their borders to the other. And Edwin has talked about, you know, as mentioned, the issue of contraband. You know, in the past we've had so many issues between maybe Kenya and Tanzania, you know, because of, not Tanzania, but Somalia, because of terrorism that, you know, has been affecting the region. In this context of some of these issues, but that everyone might agree, yes, we have to close our borders to our particular country. You know, we have to restrict the movement of people between country A and country B. Do you agree that there are, you know, some justifiable cases when this has to happen, Mugambi?
Yeah. As a libertarian, the only justification for restricting or closing border, what can say, it should be when the sovereignty of the country is threatened, when life, liberty, and the property of the country, certain country or neighboring country in particular, is threatened, and where it can even be an invasion, where one country is kind of threatened by the other. But in most cases, we've seen, even in the war, where there seems to be a justification for crossing the border, the situation in one of the country becomes worse. For example, Uganda closed part of the border with South Sudan because we fear that the war can escalate up to in Uganda, even because of the neighboring districts. But at the end of the day, many people in South Sudan could not seek for an opportunity of living because they were being killed, and at the border, no one could cross. And we looked at, as a country, as a brotherhood, we looked at South Sudan as killing each other at the border, but then we said, no, we want to be safe. Until when people put a lot of pressure and say, no, let us give them refuge at this end. But also to the other side of Uganda, we saw the closing of borders causing a lot of losses to the traders in the country. And when we weighed the cost of closing borders, it was so huge, and it was so big to the extent that for South Sudan, life was lost, and for Uganda, business was not happening, the businesses were collapsing. Until when we agreed, the leaders got sense and they agreed to open the border even when there is war. So people have got refuge in Uganda, and goods at a high risk also kept on crossing. And some traders could make loss, but others would risk and go and make money. If you survive an RPG, you go and make money. So the opening of border was very debated in the parliament, but at the end of the day, it creates an equilibrium where the loss in our country could not be attached to the government or to the closure of border, but to the ability to risk and go and look for money or sell your goods. So I believe the justification for closing borders should be, they are very few when the sovereignty is threatened, and also when life from one end or the other is threatened. But still, we find out that leaving the border open creates more opportunities, even if it is war, for people to survive from both ends, and also for people to keep on doing businesses. So closing the border is, it should be the last option. For example, when we are looking at now countries closing borders, because of COVID-19. You know what's happening, was happening at the Ugandan border, where still the closing of borders led to corruption even at the border, where some people could give in, pay money and cross. So the bureaucracies where at the borders could be given money and cross, but also still the goods, all of the goods which had to cross from you. You know, Uganda is a landlocked country. So we get our goods through ports as a Muslim. But when we closed the border because of COVID, many businesses and many people were dying because of shortage of goods from Kenya, which they survive on, goods which pass in Kenya, more than even the numbers which COVID was killing. Because COVID was not killing people, but people were dying, committing suicide because of seeing their businesses perishing. People were committing suicide because they could not afford to buy food and others. So we agreed to relax the border restriction, though even if COVID was there, and then it brought a balance still. And we realized that it was more useful to leave the border open with restriction and the Ministry of Health guidelines at the border. So it proved that it was worth it to open the border.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Mugambi, for that. Of course, you have touched on so many issues that I want us to get into in terms of enhancing free markets and why it's so important, you know, for every country, diplomatic ties or not diplomatic ties, you know, to consider, you know, easing the movement of people, the movement of goods across the border. So yeah, I'd like to remind our attendees today that we are talking to Edwin Kimani, who is a legal advisor and of course has a vast experience in matters law and regional trade for the region, and also Mugabi John from Uganda, the executive director at ALED, of course, who is also leading the fight for liberty and freedom from Uganda. And also remind you that we have our chat box is open for anyone who has any comments. We also have a section for questions and answer that any question that you might have, of course, make sure that you type. I'll be able to see and float the same to our panelists. Of course, we are talking about the issue of open borders, and earlier on, Mugambi and Edwin had, you know, try to paint a picture for us on what open borders mean in terms of goods and services, and that is people being restricted from moving from one region to another, rather one country to another. And now I'd like to bring on as we go on talking on the effects of having closed borders, of rather having all these conflicts that we are mostly having between the presidents, because most of us can agree that I don't have a problem with another trader who is in Uganda or even Rwanda, but most of these issues manifest in our countries at the government level. So Edwin, you've had a bit of experience in matters regional trade. Of course, I'd like to imagine that you've explored, you know, the economies within the Eastern African region. So what can you tell us about the effect of, you know, closure of borders, you know, the effect of one country, you know, taxing the other country so much? You know, what can you tell us about, you know, Uganda producing so many eggs and Kenya saying no, you can't export some of these products to our country because of reason A, B, C, D. What can you tell us? What are there any effects that you've seen throughout your work experience in the region that you can talk to us about, Edwin?
Well, thank you very much for that question. And before I answer that, and as I answer that, I would like to revisit the question that you just asked my co-panelist.
Okay.
I wish to dissent. Yes, I wish to dissent on what he said, and I wish to depart from what he just said. I still don't see a reason as to why we should have closed borders, and here is the reason. When we point at security issues, we should be very honest in terms of identification of security issues. Let us talk about Kenya and Somalia, for example. Terrorism in Kenya does not originate from Somalia. Terrorism has no home. For example, whether you close a border or not, whether you close a border or not, terrorism can come to your country even through the internet. And no country has been 100% successful in shutting down the internet. There are other forms, other means in which security issues move from one place to another. So having a closed border to me is not beneficial. And I will point out to this. If you look at the totalitarian regimes, if you look at Nazi Germany pointed out that their challenges came from the border with the Soviet Union. And that was the justification they had for attacking communist USSR then. If you look at, for example, the United States of America, they point out that their terrorism has come from across the border all the way to the Middle East. But it doesn't make sense because they have had their own unique forms of terrorism emerging from their own jurisdiction. So I still don't see a justification for closing down borders. We can have protocols that guide us in order to ensure the free movement of goods and services, even during the COVID pandemic. Now, onto the question that you just asked, the effects of taxing and all these measures taken up by different countries. Again, I would like to drive out to the point that who are the beneficiaries of open markets, diplomacy and free markets and free trade? It is the small traders, not the multinationals. Now, if you look at the measures that Kenya took, who were the people who were most hurt? It was us, the Kenyans, that is one. Because the cost of production of agriculture in this country has gone up. Therefore, eggs become expensive. If I can get eggs from Uganda at a cheaper price, what is entirely wrong with that? It is up to the government to ensure that it puts in place systems of empowering the farmers in this country so that they can be equipped with information, capital, and skills to produce cheaper so that they can openly compete with the Ugandans. There was no benefit in closing down the border and having eggs from Uganda taxed. The same goes to milk. If you look at the milk market, for example, in Kenya, it's a monopoly driven by one big company that is allegedly owned by the president's family. Now, if milk goes up, because milk in Kenya is very expensive, but milk from Uganda is far much cheaper. Now, who is hurt again? It is me, the Kenyan, the ordinary Kenyan, the consumer, who is hurt by these systems. Now, I want value for my money. And since I want value for my money, I want the Ugandan milk, which is far much cheaper. But entirely, as you have asked, who benefits? It is the political class that benefits from these measures, because we keep pointing out that the challenges in our countries come from the other place. come from the other jurisdiction. Whereas it is their failure, it is the failure of the political class in ensuring that we have good systems that work for us so that we can benefit from trade and from free movement of goods, services, and labor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for pointing out, and yeah, I will agree. I will agree with you on in terms of who suffers. You know, the other day I was looking at some statistics on the prices of onions, because we are getting us that is Kenya is getting a significant amount of agricultural supplies from Tanzania, and I was looking at at the statistics of the change in price that occurred immediately after those issues emerged. With one country saying that truckers are not getting to a border, truckers are not getting out of the border. Everyone pick your own supplies from the border. Of course, I agree that it's the consumer who gets to be affected. It's the small business people who get to be affected by some of these laws when goods fail to cross the border. And well, someone else or somewhere said that when goods and people don't cross borders, war and lack of peace tend to cross the border. So I don't know whether there's anyone with any questions that I can ask our panelists before we move on. But I can see some of your comments on matters to do with open borders, with some of you agreeing that there should never come an instance where borders get closed and so on. But if we were to say that borders should never, there should never come that instance where borders get to be closed. What I'm getting from this argument is we've always argued that that the role of the government within an economy is just to create that that enabling environment for entrepreneurs, for any business person to be able to trade, and for consumers to be able to obtain goods and services from whichever part of the world they feel like, which is essentially the definition of free markets. Mugambi, are we saying that the very same role that the government is playing within the economy in terms of just creating an enabling environment for it, should we begin seeing the same thing happening across the borders? And should those be the primary roles that trading blocs such as the East African community should be playing within the region? Mugambi.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, you and me, we agree that the role of the government is to just facilitate, to provide that enabling environment where human action can happen and people can exchange goods, services within and beyond the borders. And also the blocks, the foundation of every bloc, like the East African Community Bloc, built on that same principle of facilitating the goods to move from one point to another, and also to ensure that the barriers which sometimes affect the profitability of the business and also affect the affordability of the consumers are broken along the way. And that's the role which most of the blocks are defined and also aim at. However, sometimes, when politics come in, then the blocks tend to be used for political games and political maneuvering in the region. But that should be the role. For example, we know that for our region to prosper, we must identify, this is individual countries and people, because the good trade is not between countries or government and government. Trade should be between people in that particular country and people in a different country. But in most cases, most of the people, and even some education, they teach and envisage government as part of the trading, as government as part of the trading between maybe Uganda and Kenya or Tanzania. And that's why in many cases, we find that when many countries send politicians to negotiate for trade agreement, they don't send traders. They send, this is a kind of diplomacy we are also talking about. When Uganda wants to trade with Kenya, you may find a politician, a minister of finance, and a minister of trade moving and then interact with the Kenyan minister about trading. And in most cases, we envisage government being part of the negotiation of the trade deals and so forth. But in actual sense, I believe the trading should be between people. For the government is there to just see that there are no barriers between or amongst the people of the two different nations who want to trade amongst themselves. And also we look at, I would like to talk about life and prosperity when people are free to trade and exchange goods and services. When you look at the East African region, we have countries which have comparative advantage. You find that it would be easy for Uganda maybe to grow maize than Kenya trying to grow its own maize and then supply and feed its people. So when we let the border open, we shall make it to be good for Uganda, which has a comparative advantage in growing maize, and then sell it to Kenya in a very affordable or in a what is maybe cheap for Kenya, than struggling for the government to struggle to close the border and encourage the Kenyan producers also to grow maize and then try to sell it domestically. Then you find that Kenya will find it hard. And even still when Kenya produce it, it will not have an ease or a comparative advantage in doing that. So international trade among us, or the trade amongst the countries, enable the countries which find it easy with their technology and production to produce good, but also to sell it beyond their borders and domestic market. And you find that in that process, there is a win-win situation between the Kenyan people, the Ugandan people, and also the other.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mugabe. Before I bring on Edwin to tackle some issues, to do with these trading blocks. Currently, we have a poll that should be on your screen, or whether there are, any justifiable cases where borders should be closed. Yeah, guys, kindly vote. Unfortunately, we have most of our attendees today in the panelists section, and I don't think they'll be able to vote. We are only trying to get a feel of what your understanding of open borders is. Now, Edwin, if I may ask, we've had the East African community, which for quite some time now, in the past, across the region, SADC and IGAD and COMESA and so on. And I want to believe last year we had the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which again was was ratified and supposed to have taken effect in terms of trying to ease the ease of doing business, trying to enhance the ease of doing business across the continent. And here are two issues, that I never seem to get a balance between. We are having a country, let's say, for example, we are having a country like Kenya and Uganda. We are having some diplomatic, discussion that's some bilateral, trade discussions between the two countries. At the same time, we might be having a, something that we are trying to talk about, which is also affected by any trading bloc. Let's say, for example, the East African community. So here you find there are two countries that are trying to pursue some economic interests is bilateral. That two countries are between each other. At the very same time, whatever they are trying, they're trying to have an agreement on is also maybe being affected or rather determined by a trade bloc such as the East African community. What I'd like to understand is how do we strike a balance between these issues? Because looking at some of the trade agreements or other relations that exist between countries, we've had these trade blocs, trying to pursue ABCD, and also we've had two countries, maybe trying to come into agreement on such times. And I want to believe that these are some of the grounds on which we end up having issues, diplomatic issues across the border, because country A, country B, didn't do A, B, C, D as per the agreement that we have. How do you think we can reach a balance between these issues, Edwin?
Well, thank you very much again for that question. And again, please kindly allow me to revisit your past question on the role of government in matters trade.
Go ahead.
From what I understand, and as a libertarian, this is what I understand as the role of government. The role of government should always remain as a night watchman, rectifying the wrong.
Right.
And this is what I understand by that. One, and the most important, is protection of property rights. Secondly, there is a redistribution of resources. We have to be very clear that the market is not always right. And through taxation, resources are redistributed to areas of need. Again, I'll take an example of Kenya. There is a northern frontier that has remained marginalized for the longest time. And one of the debates we are having is the reallocation of resources. We need to allocate resources to this region so that we can build their capacity. Again, the markets are not always right. If I am a potato seller, for example, chances are I will sell to that place because there is a lack of existence of a market. And these people are so marginalized that they are so poor that they will never buy my potatoes. So I'll still sell my potatoes in Nairobi. Thirdly, capacity building.
Right.
The role of government as a capacity builder. Ensure a good education system. We have to ensure that there is access to finance through policy. We have to ensure that the skills of the people are well built so that they can trade. We have to ensure that they can access capital. Fourthly, I think the role of government is policy making, largely policy making. And no government should participate, or in the least amount possible, participate in trade as a trader, either through state-owned enterprises or through natural trade. Now, on to your question. on the issue of, for example, BRICS. That is regional bodies in African trade. We have to be very clear with these RECs. We can borrow the best practices. What has East African community done well? What has IGAD done well? What has the tripartite agreement done well? Borrow those ones and then tailor make them to suit the rest of Africa. Secondly, we have to also be honest with ourselves. These RECs might at one point outlive their purposes. Why have all these regional trading bodies when we can trade as one? Why move from the East African community to SADC, where you have a very different trading rules, when we can have or observe one trading body, and that is under the African Continental Free Trade Area? So yes, at some point, I agree that we have to maintain them. But once they outlive their purposes, we should abolish them and allow people to trade as they wish. And I'll give an example. I was speaking to somebody from Egypt. And one of the things they noted was that a pineapple, for example, in their country, can go to as high as was it around $30 or $20 at some point. Yet in this country here in Kenya, I can get a pineapple at $50. If these people from Egypt can buy my pineapples at this cost, at a very cheap cost, why not protect the consumers there by giving them this option of buying this pineapple and not go through all these border checkpoints just because I want to sell that pineapple? There are two options. Either at one point we recognize that these RECs have outlived their purposes, and two, observe best practices and borrow from them and tailor make them.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And before I react to your comments, Mugambi, what do you have to say on the same question that Kimani was responding to?
First of all, I think I disagree with the money on government also being or having a role in distribution of wealth. As he has said, market is not right, but market is the only.
I plan on, yes, I'm planning on revisiting that that particular point of view. But yeah, first response to this to the last question.
Okay, the last question is about the treaties and the brokes. I think African, or after African Continental Free Trade is one of the blessings which at least Africa in this century has got. And I'm one person who believes that if we implement what is the agreement stipulates on paper, Africa can raise up in the last quarter maybe of the century, of the 21st century we are in, and Africa can also start getting the tigers of Africa. However, the bigger question in Africa, even in every treaty and every agreement, is to put politics politics first than the economics. Though they say too much of politics is too much of economics. But in this agreement, what we see, even if it is in West Africa, it's politics, and the politics which even stems down to nationalism, what we may call nationalism. You saw how Nigeria, the biggest economy now so far of Africa, being almost the last to join the caravan on African Continental Free Trade. One, it was the politics back in their country. They believed that Nigeria was more stronger, and it was supposed to be at the receiving end, but not it supporting all these other countries in Africa to grow. So they believe that they can stand on their own. So politics was dictating back to the Nigeria. And they also believe that they can make it on their own. They believe that when we restrict our borders, we can be able to get taxes. We can be able also to negotiate our own trade deals and agreement with European Union, with North African country free trade. So that's what I believe. But I believe if our leaders can put economics to be the first before politics, then such agreements will have more fruits. And at the end of the day, we shall look at prosperity being distributed in the best way using the interaction of human beings or the citizens of Africa through trading and even crossing the borders and sharing experience, doing work from one end to the other. But I still agree that politics is still too much in our kind of trade deals and negotiation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Looking back at the the last session that we had on the African free market, towards the end of the session something came up, and that was politics and the political goodwill that most of African countries have, or rather lack, and it's come up once again, politics and what happens when diplomats and government representatives also get to sit down on to negotiate matters economics. And I want to ask you, Kimani, of course, we having so many of us, libertarians, which is a pretty growing political ideology in Africa right now. But we also have systems, that have existed for so long, nearing 60 years. Towards it's now going to 60 years in Kenya. Do you believe that we have the capacity to get to a point where we are able to put aside some of these politics, and everyone trying to to get something for themselves? Do we have individuals, within our African societies who have the capacity to deal with some of the these issues, and remain objective, in realizing that this is good for our economy, this is good for our country? Because the reason why I'm asking you, Edwin, this question is that in the past we've seen so many promising young politicians, campaigning on the platform of doing the right thing, and I want to believe the same has also been replicated in Uganda and Tanzania, and any other African country out there. Do you think there's hope for us to ever get to such a point?
Well, yes, I do. I do agree with you that history in Africa has shown us that we have these people, and this is what I want to advise us, that we should avoid these people. No person can claim to have the monopoly of knowledge. That is one. Two, no person should claim to be able to liberate a whole community. And one thing, maybe this sounds a little bit radical, I don't believe that there is a nation called Kenya. I don't believe that there is a nation called Uganda or Nigeria.
Right.
But there are small ethnic groups. The ethnic groups are the nations. These communities should be able to self-determine, not the supranational government, but the people. Right. If we reach a point where we have a governmental system that allows these communities to make collective decisions that inform the top, then that is when we have a good governance system. We have seen in the past, the people, for example, who helped us fight for independence, come up and somehow they get the leadership of the country. Then from there, it has been downward movement for very many African countries.
That's
I
true.
think suddenly we are realizing that we cannot bank on one person, but we can bank on communities. We should now start thinking of development, sustainable development, from the bottom up, from the communities at the grassroots level, all the way to the supranational government level. And that now should inform each and every country. When we have that, we will not be able to be afraid that, that community is against this community, that ethnic group is against this ethnic group. That is a perpetuation that was given to us by the colonial government, where they used these communities against those communities. And the independent Kenya, for example, the leaders of independent Kenya, in as much as they promised to fight that, they realized that was a weapon. And probably that's why we have this negative ethnicity within our borders. If we want a good governance system, the governance system has to reflect the people, the wishes of the people of that country.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Mugambi, as we finalize, what do you have to say on that particular topic, kindly, briefly, in like 1 minute?
Yeah, thank you. What I wanted to say, and I don't want us to forget, is what my colleague said about the distribution of
I've not forgotten.
Okay.
I've not forgotten. Yeah.
Okay, so you wanted me to comment on?
Yeah, just respond. Comment on both, and yeah, quickly within the next at most 1.5 minutes.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. One, I would like to comment about our governments. This is what I want to talk about. Our governments also being, you talked about the night watchman, but also talking about the development which starts from the grassroots. And that development which starts at the grassroots is always people-centered. It's not government-centered, but people-centered. And maybe what government has to see, it's just to see that people can freely interact and move and also do what they do without injuring the other or affecting the other negatively. And that's what I think all of us we must see. As we've said, that the knowledge, because business and development is built on how much knowledge do you know? How much knowledge, as what my friend has said, what knowledge have you acquired? And knowledge is not acquired by the central planning. There is no group which can say we have got all this, as you have said, the knowledge. But different people take different interests in searching for the knowledge, and then they get a meaning out of it, which helps them to start looking at their personal development and also how they can trade with each other. So I just say that the grassroots is very key, and people must be free if they are going to get and discover the much knowledge they want and then use it for the trading. So,
okay, thank you. Thank you, Mugambi. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. Unfortunately, we are out of time. We are 10 minutes past time when this session was supposed to end. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you so much. And yeah, because Mugambi, you are here to make your comment on the whole issue of to ask you to make that as your final submissions, and then you'll give room to Edwin also to make his final remarks as we come to the end of this question. Mugambi, briefly.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. My final marks would be about the borders and the freedom we must understand as different players in the different country, because we are seeing young people in different countries are trying to start up to create products, to engage in knowledge distribution, to do some trading. So my last word would be me and you and people who are in different or in this libertarian movement to ensure that we put so much, or we put many platforms where our young people, but also leaders who are going to take over the political office, to understand that it is very great to create a legacy for your country to prosper and to create wealth in the community. Because if we have wealth in the region, we are going to have a middle class economy, or we are going to have a middle class. And the middle class, we know very well that it can fight for the rights, it can fight for their freedom, and even it can appreciate all the liberties. But when we don't have prosperity in the region, due to the curtailing of the policies restricting the people for the goods to move and the people to move, then we shall be having many, many political problems in our country. And I do believe the best way to solve the political problem is to first solve the economic problem. When we solve the economic problem, then the political problem can also start slowly. However, there are those who will agree that we start with the political problem. And the political problem, sometimes it's so risky, but slowly, slowly, because we know that as libertarians, sometimes the evolution, rather than a revolution, gets our answers right. So that's
Okay,
what
thank
I
you.
would like to end with.
Thank you so much, Mugambi. Kimani, your final remarks?
Well, these are my final thoughts, and basically what maybe I'd urge many of you to read, maybe Professor Danny Rodriki, Development on Trade. I urge everyone to read that because of this. We have to realign our ideology when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to free market, when it comes to trade. We have to be very much people-centered.
Right.
The reason as to why the movement on globalism is slowing down is because it has been hijacked by government. Government is still perpetuating its ideology, its thought, and its will. It's all about the people who trade at the borders, the small-scale farmers who want their goods to travel abroad, the small-scale farmers who cannot access credit because government does not want to assist them. We have to rethink governance away from a totalitarian regime to a community-based governance system where we realign and see that our government systems do not have to reflect the West or the East, but unique to the African setting. And that is when we start with the political system, then we can have the economic system now falling into place to reflect the proper system that we had in Africa. Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunately, our time is up, and like I always say during each of our sessions, there's so much that we can, we can always talk about on these particular topics, and especially on libertarianism and free markets. And yeah, I would like for this debate to go on, and I'm sure it would go on for days without an end. Of course, we have to look forward into implementing some of these recommendations that we are getting, and I want to believe that we have not been able to exhaust, some of our, trying to chart the way forward, because the whole issue of diplomatic issues, the closing of borders, and most importantly, the restriction of the movement of goods. At the end of the day, it's the consumer, it's the small scale business people that end up losing, of course. And it affects our economies, all of us, and we end up getting hurt by some of these decisions. Whether the issue of bad diplomatic relations remains to be an issue of a show of might between President A and President B, or whether they consider the closing of border to be a justification of such actions, we have to agree that one thing that is critical, for the development of the region, for the prosperity of individuals within economies and regions remains opening borders and ensuring that people and goods are able to, to cross the borders on time. So thank you so much to our attendees for joining us today. Of course, we were live on Facebook, so this session is available on our Facebook page, Liberty Sparks. It's also going to be going up on our YouTube channel at Liberty Sparks, so you can always check us up. And also, we've also uploaded any other past sessions that we've had. So in case you missed any of those sessions, you can always go back, for your own peruse. So thank you so much also to our panelists today for joining us. I believe this is not going to be, the last discussion to have you. We're going to be engaging in more and more discussions as we go on. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for trying to fight for free markets, libertarianism, and a prosperous society. Thank you so much, and see you next time.
Thank you.